Hello, Jim. Welcome.
Thanks, Daniel.
Um, yeah, it's I used to do regular podcasts, and I knew how I would start all of these, but these days I'm just kind of winging it. I'm excited to have you. I'm excited to talk with you. I came across your work on a Facebook forum about spiritual awakening. Somebody somebody recommended your website and said, there's a lot of um, confusion when it comes to spirituality and especially awakening on the internet. And this, Jim's work really cuts through the noise. And so that was like, oh, that's interesting. I clicked and I, you know, started reading, and I immediately recognized, oh wow, yeah, there's quality here, there's clarity. This guy knows what he's talking about. Oh, and this is my cat Behemoth, who also knows what he's talking about. So, sir, pardon me. So I've been reading your work since then. It's been a couple months now, and I think what is refreshing to me is, I think, as I was saying earlier when we were talking in private, is that you have a real, well, you appreciate science. You obviously read and are up on what the modern world, is about, and you don't reject that. It's not something that is foreign to your spirituality and your and really, you speak a lot about the importance of watching things like, sleep cycles and diet and exercise, and things that seem to be mundane, but what I've found in my experience are really powerful tools to supplement spiritual discovery, spiritual investigation, and ultimately healing. And yeah, I guess I guess that in and of itself is I think an interesting place to start, is uh, the ways in which I think, in the spiritual journey, the more mundane aspects of upkeep and health are sometimes overlooked in spiritual communities, or at least, modern mainstream spirituality. And I'm curious, yeah, what your thoughts are on that, and why you place such a focus on that where others might not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Thank you for the kind words about my work. And thanks everyone for your kind words who have already come across my blog. And for those who are new, it's spiritualawakeningprocess.com. And I've been running that blog since 2010. To answer some of your questions, I think it's important to take a step back, because I think that's one of the steps that gets missed in these discussions. And that step back takes us to, what is spirituality? What is spiritual awakening? And I encourage everybody to figure it out for themselves what this means, but just understand the definition I'll be using today. Spirituality is discovering what is real. That's it. It strips away all this stuff to just see what is real. And this is very different than how we've been taught to just believe things as real, right? So when I start talking about the path towards realizing spiritual freedom or freedom from suffering, which to me are the same, we're stripping away stuff, not onboarding new beliefs. And this right here is a massive divide between people like myself who are offering help in releasing ego, liberation, freedom, nirvana, and light, right? These are all different words, different cultures have used moksha, we can throw in there. I don't use that because nobody would know what I'd be talking about. So I use spiritual freedom. All right, so this stripping away process. And then what is a spiritual awakening? It's a realization of what is real. It's like somebody poked a finger through the gauze of illusion, and you could kind of see outside. You're like, oh, that's what's going on. Now, how people respond, which is also kind of mixed into these definitions and experiences of spiritual awakening, has to do with your ego structure, that we're not letting go of everything entirely at first, as big of an event as it feels like. Later on, we figure out, wow, I was still looking through like 9,000 more veils of gauze. that what was life. It just one kind of got a little thin and I saw a little bit more. And so we start to do that process of letting go, and how we respond with that initial experience has to do with how our ego interprets it. So if I like, by my ego standards, what I just saw about reality, this is when we're having the blissful moment, the big loving moment, the heart opening moments, right? All those types of things, which immediately becomes something that ego is like, ooh, how do I get more of this? Right. And so that's the question that ends up in my inbox, Daniel. How do I get more of this? Right. Then there's the other side, of course, which is if we poke a finger through that gauze and we see a little bit of reality and our ego doesn't like it. It's like, oh, I didn't want to see that about my relationship, about my job, about my health, about the trauma I had that I thought I was over with, right? I don't like that. So now the question that ends up in my inbox is, how do I stop this thing? I don't want to know this. And yet it's still just a part of reality that we saw. So that's how I'm defining it. We're here to understand what is real. We're stripping away ego because the ego causes suffering by not engaging with what is real. It's trying to engage with its illusion. And so if I tried to engage with Daniel's cat and treated it like a flamingo, could you imagine what I might do to this poor animal? Right. But we do this all the time in so many situations of trying to engage with something not as it is, but as we think it should be. And that causes us tremendous suffering, including with the body. And that's kind of circling back to why I'm so simple in talking about, well, what are we putting in our bodies? How are we sleeping? How are we getting full range of motion activity? These types of things, because that's real. And it's one of our most solid touch points in a world of illusion around us.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you had your awakening experience in 2007, but it's not so important to you anymore. And I'm curious what you meant by that.
Well, initially, it's like any new experience where we're really open to something and it feels very significant. And it is at that time, because the awakening experience that I talk about really was built off of a lot of other little choices that moved into it. And I want to make sure that that's understood by the group, that there's a continuum. Okay. It didn't just show up out of nowhere with no other sort of help along the way for me. There were a lot of other decisions around, like, ooh, I don't like how my thoughts are going on in my head. I'm going to start to change how I interact at work, and moments of letting go and of challenging levels of fear in myself that all kind of build up to this moment where my brain goes quiet and I lose all desire. And I'm just like, what happened? It's like if you had a radio playing in your head your whole life and you're so used to that radio, you didn't even know that it was on at that level, and then it turned off. And so after that, I call it my awakening experience because it's like I can't stop seeing what's real. And like more parts of the illusion just kind of are getting shredded because I no longer put the energy into them. I no longer believe them as so completely as I once did. And this starts a whole cycle of understanding myself, of releasing things, of grieving these things. That now at this point, it's like it was great that that kind of triggered the moment. Same way we're all happy when we were born, but we don't think about, being born every day and all the stuff that mom had to do for all of us to bring us out safely into this world. It was important. It's no longer defining.
Yeah. Yeah. I've for me it was I think, I'd say a similar process of there were many choices and many stages of healing before I had what felt to me like an awakening. Really, I don't really know what else to call it. And I'm curious. There was for me, one of the things that characterized it was this disappearance of distinction between myself and the universe. It was this realization, not intellectual, that I was like, yeah, I guess we're all one thing. I intellectually knew that or heard about that idea for a long time, but it was a moment of real experience of, oh, wow. Oh, damn. Like there it is. And like very quickly, like a lot of, Buddhism that I'd studied for years and years instantly made so much sense. It was like it was obvious, it was almost obviously so. And I'm curious, you know, because there is, I guess, on the internet and in among people that I speak to, like there are different associations of what it is that spiritual awakening actually is. And I guess I explain it, as best I can as this kind of merging of this or this falling away of distinctions. And I'm sure there are many other attributes that can be tacked onto that. But I guess, yeah, is there any particular way that um, you describe your own awakening or that you characterize awakenings in general?
So what you're describing, and let me know if I'm hearing this right, is you're describing a oneness experience,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And so that is an element of reality. So that was the element of reality. So remember, everyone, the reality is vast. There's a lot of different little ways that we can finally get a little keyhole into looking at it. And sometimes it's that sense of oneness where you realize that you aren't just this body. You're not just these thoughts, you're not just these emotions, that you're actually much broader. And that's an element of reality. And so, the questions that often come with people is like, well, how do I live and engage from that? And from that level of experience, you don't, right? You're just seeing a part of reality. You can't live with that sense of not being a person, right? So there's this interesting kind of return to source that we go through and coming back to be the person where we now have fluidity to understand how the two relate, to how the non-dual relates to the dual. And unfortunately, sometimes, and this is just kind of how English is, being very binary, non-dual and dualistic end up being kind of pitted against each other almost in modern spirituality. Because like, well, these are the dualists and this is non-dualists. It's like, no, like they're inseparable. And I think some of the non-dualists on the more extremes, they're trying to somehow not be a person at all, if that makes sense, and live, which you can't do
Mm.
because we are, right? This is our little vehicle that we navigate life through. So in terms of like my spiritual awakening, I poke through a different hole. And so I saw, wow, like the desire is made up. There's no need for noise. There's nowhere to go. Right.
Mm.
Which was very confusing for my ego. It's just like, where's the noise? What am I supposed to do with this? Right. If I had a teacher at the time who could really help me, or I could go back in time and say, like, this is good because that discontent is where your next level of work is, Jim. That's what you look at next, is the thing that can't be okay as it is. And that's such a fundamental part of that. And that's actually one of the bigger pieces we have to be mindful of in today's culture. Today's culture is not about being okay as you are, it's about achieving something somewhere else. It's the pursuit of happiness. This is in our constitution, right? Pursuit doesn't mean you achieve it, it means you continue to pursue it. And so a lot of people are now pursuing a lot of things, oneness experience, peaceful experiences, bliss experiences, lots of the fun stuff, or they're trying to kind of run away from traumas and other things like that. And so they're not really trying to resolve it. They're trying to get away from a part of themselves. So this becomes a fundamental form of rejection of the present moment and ourselves. That right at some of these key moments of aha, this stuff comes in and overwhelms the spiritual work that we're doing.
Mm. Yeah. So what I hear you saying is like there are different illusions, different things that we might see through, and I'm in a sense it's I guess you can well here's a question that I've been wondering about is any realization itself an awakening, any realization of like, oh, I didn't see that before, um or are there certain kinds of realizations that are awakenings, spiritual awakenings? um I've been thinking of it as a really a house that we're in, and it has many doors out of it. And when you walk out, you end up in the same field and under the same sky. It doesn't really matter which door you go out of, you end up in the same place. But I wonder if yeah, I'm still investigating, still trying to feel into if it's certain kinds of realizations that constitute a spiritual awakening, or if if every realization is itself a small awakening?
There's a couple things at play. So one, when I'm using words, I'm using them strategically and invite you and everybody else to figure out how you strategically want to use them because we live in a spiritually poor language. Right? We don't have these set in stone the way like I'm going to project that Sanskrit does, but I feel like there are a fair number of more words around these types of things that we simply don't have. So we're kind of inventing them.
Mm,
And that's okay. I use spiritual awakening very narrowly to be around this sort of continued seeing that something doesn't want to go back to sleep. I use spiritual opening as a much more common term of like, ooh, I see something, and then we close off from it.
mm,
Now, something like that could be like you're on a spiritual retreat and you see and have a lot of these interesting experiences where you feel very open, very clear in yourself. And then what happens? You leave the retreat and then you go back to rest your life. And then people email me about that and they're like, oh, how do I get it back? Right. This is, again, the sense of loss still operating very much in the ego sense. Spiritual openings are very useful if we accept what we see. That's to me, that's when you've really realized something. Because a lot of times, again and again, what we'll do is we'll see something and we actually don't accept it. And let's make sure this is a neutral term. That the opening doesn't necessarily just show us, oh, look all the lovely glitter in my room. It also shows me the pile of burning crap. And a lot of realizations like that are actively rejected. So they're not allowed to sit in the person and not allowing the person to go to that next level, actually working through the thing they realize. So that's some of the things that I do as far as realizations. Are we really accepting what we see? Because if we do, then it is a realization, right? And the opening is more like the light in the room that can shine on anything. But we may not go to that realization. We may just say, nope, we go into denial, go back
mm.
into willful ignorance. And a lot of people are stuck in those spaces.
Yeah. So it's really you know, I guess. So I hear you defining the way that you're talking about spiritual awakening is an opening that doesn't let you fall back asleep, that it keeps on pulling you or pushing you or whatever, towards more and more revelation, more and more falling away
Dropping.
of veils,
Yeah, the dropping.
and approaching the truth. Mm,
Yeah. And
mm,
I don't know why it happens or when it happens, but it's internally still there's some sort of decision the person makes for themselves. They're like, I really am done with these stories. Like there's some thirst, some it's usually more of a sickness of suffering. For me, I think it was more of a thirst of like whatever this other stuff is that society's doing, I'm just not that interested in it. And it's like girlfriends and work, okay, I did that. It's like this is not as advertised. This is like it's fine. Right? So that thirst definitely drove me on a lot of levels. But for more people, it's going to be suffering. It's going to be trauma. And suffering, too, I want to make a distinction. There is pain in life. Pain is a communication tool. There is chronic pain, which is different, right? Arthritis is a chronic pain. Suffering is our emotional responses. Suffering is the choice. Suffering is a choice we can unlearn. We can't get rid of the pain of stubbing our toe. In fact, we don't want to because you don't want to hurt your toe too much. You want the toe to give you pain signals. Pain signals is a very useful communication. Most people are being driven by this sort of active pain and suffering, where there's physiological, or emotional pain. And that's kind of encased with a response that doesn't like it. So that's the suffering on top of it. And this is a big thing in terms of trauma work that a lot of people are trying to get spirituality to resolve for them. Is you actually have to surrender to really do trauma work well. You have to accept where you are. And a lot of times people are coming to try and work with that through rejection. And it's a hard thing to say to want to accept and surrender to sexual abuse, narcissistic abuse, and some really terrible things that have gone on. But that is how it is. And surrender is not passive. It's simply saying, this is what exists for me. So we're not piling on more resistance and more pain, more suffering. And so now let's see what we can do to get help appropriately.
yeah. Yeah. The question of where, how to address trauma and the use of spirituality, to sometimes either get away from or um, mask these psychological issues and wounds. you've spoken a little bit about that in your blog, or maybe a lot, but yeah, is there, where would you say that line is? And yeah, I know you've sometimes you refer people to psychologists and psychiatrists because that's, what help they need at that point. How do you make that call for yourself with somebody that you're working, or if somebody's looking to get spiritual help or psychological help?
Yeah, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing, right? They're hoping the spirituality can get actually away from themselves, away from these parts that hurt. Part of how I talk about oneness is actually we don't need to worry about being at one with the world. We need to worry about being at one with ourselves. And that's particularly challenging because it's not just happening in your brain. It's happening in your emotions, your adrenals, your hormones, right? All that sort of stuff is constantly creating a sense of threat and tension. It's happening in your body. And I think that's something that the healing community has really taken a lot of great steps in the last 10 years from what I've seen, where there's greater acceptance that this is a thing that we need to do. And you do have to go to your body. And that's why books like Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score has gotten more and more popular. Like it's to the point where like I've actually seen people with that book out at like the market or at the coffee shop, right? This is a deep, hard book to have trucking around. So I think take that as a very good sign that we're appreciating that sort of stuff. But trauma work, healing doesn't work from resistance. So the biggest gift the spiritual path has is supporting somebody in surrender. And again, surrender is not passivity, it's not giving up. It is saying, this happened, and I'm letting go of resistance to this reality. Because when you can do that, whether it's trauma or anything we want to change or address in life, now we can take action. But if we're in resistance, then we're constantly trying to control outcomes and people and situations all the time. And that creates more suffering. And it is a very common thing, Daniel, on this path that people are using spirituality to create more suffering. This is one of the big objections to religion, that we've seen like so much control, so much heavy handedness in that space, that the way is being lost for not everybody in religion, by the way. I'm not down on that as an entirety, but a lot of places where they're just missing the purpose of helping to guide people through their lives, instead just enforcing a mold on other people. So we can use beliefs in all sorts of different ways to create more suffering. And since that's happened a lot in spirituality, that's confusing people. On top of the fact that this general idea, it's all about belief, it's all in our head. It's not. We are bodies and we have to respect the body. So if somebody has like a therapist and they're working through their trauma and stuff like that, it makes working with me possible. I generally want people to be more complete with that work before coming to someone like me. I think this is part of your question. Let me know if I've wandered off too far. But a lot of times, yeah, it's just like you need to talk to a therapist and start to work through these layers, but surrender to this reality, because if you surrender, then there's a way out. If you're resisting, you just get in the way of a lot of things that need to happen because the body understands how it needs to release trauma.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess what is the distinction between spiritual work and therapeutic work? This is something that I'm looking at and working through again and again.
The thing about spiritual path again is we surrendered everything. So, like today on my blog, as some of you may know, I'm talking about having a 7-day breakfast challenge. Why is a spiritual teacher talking about breakfast? Everything is connected, right? Everything is one. We can't do this work and ignore any part of ourselves. And a lot of people are misassigning different experiences going on inside themselves to spiritual things. So we often use this word energy as a placeholder for other stuff. And I really encourage everyone to inquire into it. Inquire into it says, like, what am I actually feeling? Because saying something is energy often becomes a shield or a misdirection that doesn't really support us. Since our nutrition is so poor in Western culture and things have been normalized that have never been normal for us to eat, and even what I'm suggesting is not inherently normal, it's just healthier. The breakfast challenge is a way to let people test for themselves. And that's a big thing about this work, is learning to test for ourselves what's going on inside of ourselves. And so if after 7 days you feel great from eating this, it's like you've learned something, right? And if you already feel about the same, then you realize that your nutrition was probably pretty good. But these are some ways that we sort of bring it back to the body and work towards wholeness here. What's going on here now, right? In the body. The body can't be anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting what you said about energy. When people talk about energy, that it's sometimes a shield or a misdirection. I've felt something similar where, I oftentimes I don't really know necessarily what somebody means when they talk about, oh, like energy, or and I my what I've noticed, or what I suspect, is that energy is really, um we can feel it in terms of, psychological energy, of like so much that our body is taking in, all this information, millions and millions of bits of information coming in from our eyes, our body, our physical bodies, our psychological subconscious, and it's producing a, some kind of sense, an aversion or attraction, a, I don't know, a kind of flavor to, around a person or a thing or a place. And we don't really know exactly what it is that's happening, but we can feel that something's there. And so when I hear energy, I translate that. It's like, oh, there's some sense that somebody has around something, and they're defining it as energy. Um,
It's a
that's
placeholder word.
yeah.
Placeholder word for something we don't understand. There's a book by Leonard Mlodinow. It's called Subliminal: How the Unconscious Rules You. That's a good one to read into. And you just used the term of like, all these bits of information, like somehow neuroscience have come up with a number for like how much we're processing it per minute or per hour. And I have no idea how they came up with that number. I think it's like 6 million or 8 million bits of information per something, but it's in that book. But it's an interesting way to get into this conversation. It's like how much our subconscious is supplying these kind of ambiguous feelings that we definitely take action off of. But what are they actually saying? What are they perceiving? Are we engaging with reality, or what are we engaging with? What do we think is happening right now?
Well, I wonder if, spirituality itself is another one of those terms, that we're talking about something that we don't really know what it is. And in a sense, I wonder if it's also a placeholder word.
It often is. That's why I said at the beginning, my definition, for this gathering, is spirituality is about understanding what is real. And the minute you put that word in there, you have to live from a space of curiosity. You can't
Mm,
just rely on like, well, I know what's real, right? So that's one of the ego shields. I know this about this, I know that. It's like if you actually know, you're never going to be hurt by inquiry. You'll be vindicated.
mm,
But the reason we have to create those shields around like, well, I know what spirituality is, what awakening is, what energy is, right? That's fear. Fear
mhm.
has to hide.
Yeah, that's yeah. You'll never be hurt by inquiry. Yeah.
No, never.
And right, it's that's why people aren't curious, is because they're afraid of finding out that maybe what they know is actually not the truth, not real. um yeah. Mm. Yeah, I like that definition, and I feel like, in my own, um when I was younger, I would spend a lot of time in nature on my own, in solitude, and I would have these moments of real, just clarity, and these feelings of, oh wow, like this is life. I'm looking right at it. I'm in it. I'm here. And in a sense, it's, yeah, it's this sense of reality, of something that is more real than reality, where reality being what we typically day to day assume is real. But having that, dropping into that experience of really being present, it feels more real. Which, you know is an oxymoron, but it's, right. It's, Yeah. And I think that that in and of itself is kind of, maybe that is the thing that spirituality is really based on. Um, hmm. And at the very same time, we have a whole culture, mainstreamed where spirituality means something very different, or is interpreted to mean something very different.
The means to a goal. I mean,
Yeah.
the transactional nature of modern culture is very problematic. And I definitely struggle from time to time because I'm always interested in like how do I support people? But once we start to turn things into a business like I have, right, there's this delicate balance because people have been so brainwashed, honestly, into thinking about everything as a commodity and something to be transacted. And the commodity thing is coming from a student coming from somebody else in the indigenous community who used that term. So I just want to credit where that's coming from. That one's not one of my own, but it's absolutely correct. So when we go online these days, more and more, it's about what is this path going to get you? And that's why when I'm talking, it can be so jarring when I say like it's going to get you nothing. Right? In fact, we're going to be losing. We're losing ideas, we're losing attachments, we're losing things. And to the modern Western ego, it's like, what? No, 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 no. I don't want this. Or I'll lose the stuff I don't like. I don't want to lose the stuff I do like. So, like, how do I only lose what I don't want and keep what I do? But that's the ego game.
Hmm.
And that's the demands that are often being put into this space too. And there's plenty of people who are catering to that. We're still lost in a lot of levels of illusion around what their offering is, trying to give to the person, the other person consumes, and we create these cycles of giving. I am actually trying to work myself out of a job when I'm teaching people these things because once you really get them, you don't need me.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'll never be able to make anybody more here now than they already are. And that's kind of one of those fundamental realizations that we have that you're just here. And everything else is a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's such a, that's a much bigger conversation, but I'm curious about, right, how does one um do spiritual work in the landscape today? Because it's something that you do, it's something that I've been doing for a couple years now, and um along the way I've run across many of these questions of, well, I can't do this without being in integrity with my own values. And yet it seems like a lot of the marketing advice and stuff that's out there is like, I learned about it, I tried it, and like this just doesn't feel right. Um, and so I know you've spent a lot of time, and I admire the integrity that you bring to your work. Um, yeah, how do you go about navigating in this world as a spiritual teacher and keeping that integrity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely one that, I continue to have to surrender to as honestly, the illusion changes. So society is always an illusion. And, as we change with different priorities and different places that we want to play in our illusions, right? So Facebook didn't exist, then it does. Now, Instagram didn't exist, now it does. TikTok didn't exist, now it does. How do I want to play in those illusions? Because they actually demand on you in a different way. Like maybe I'll do something with TikTok at some point, but I'm just deeply, deeply concerned by these briefer and briefer sound bites, right? Because what are we left with if that's what we're saying with spirituality? And spirituality is simple, but it also complicated in that sort of beautifully maddening way. So I don't know where I'll be with some of that sort of marketing stuff at different times. What I do know is I care about people and I want to help. And I feel like what I do does help. And so that to me helps kind of anchor me. It's like, is the breakfast challenge thing going to be helping people? I think so. So I'll offer that out and encourage people to share it. Do I think my What is a Spiritual Awakening blog post helps people? I think so. So I encourage people to share it, right? To encourage people to share it is playing in the illusion of this is what we do now. It's like we would never have done it, had a Facebook share in 1993. It did not exist. And other things are like, how do I play with things like money? That's why I do the suggested donations for all my classes and my group work and for my one-on-ones, is to help encourage people to think in those terms that this is made up. how do we support one another, not just like, this is the bill, pay the bill. And, some people really get that. And so I've had plenty of very small donations for a lot of the things I've done, and that's fine. And I've had other people donate more. And I really appreciate everybody who gets that we're trying to create a wealth distribution system that supports us in taking care of ourselves and paying for our mortgages and our dinners. Um, and we're spreading it around rather than getting lost in some of this sort of compartmentalization. It's like, no, it's just this. If you can't pay this, you can't have it. So that's one of the places where I've been trying to bend the rules. So it's kind of like the Matrix, right? Some rules can be broken and some can be bent. Well, this is one of the ones that I've been bending, and I'm very happy with it because I feel like that's one of the ones that people have really understood.
Yeah. Yeah, I've since seeing the way that you do the donation system, it's something that I've started to do myself. And I really appreciate it because it's um I remember you saying at one point, like, if somebody has only $5 that they can honestly give, then that's enough for, it's and I keep that in the back of my head now, because it's and another teacher that I spoke with, he said, like, there should be no barrier to the Dharma, to the knowledge, the way. Um, if somebody's truly earnest and truly seeking, and I believe all of us are fundamentally, but maybe we are more cognizant of it, and sometimes maybe less so. But yeah, it's something that's changed the way that I offer my services, and in the way that I frame it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, take that idea, and I encourage anyone listening, take that idea. Like, I'm not trademarking shit. Like, God knows, there's another thing, it's like, is someday I'm gonna have to trademark something because there's another side of the world that steals things and just copies it. I've had parts of my blog posts, copied wholesale, which is a problem in terms of search engine stuff, through the years. And mindfulness is a trademark term, not by me, but like by the people who started that. So it's weird, what sort of things this world will kind of force you to. So it really breaks any sort of idealism. Idealism likes to show up in spirituality. It makes us more and more pragmatic, like, well, this is what the conditions are doing. But again, it comes back to like, am I integrated with myself? What am I really doing with this work?
Yeah. Yeah, and coming back to that notion, as you said, of like, I'm here to help, I care about people. um Let that be the guiding light. um yeah. Mm.
And the whole spiritual awakening, kind of coming back to this topic too, the choice that people have to make, whether or not they feel like things are kind of dropping out of them, or they just had an opening where they realize something but now don't know what to do with it. The choice is to go inside, to try and understand yourself, and to come with that sense of curiosity of accepting that you don't understand. And this is a huge hurdle. It's a huge hurdle because you've been around for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. You're like, of course I know what's going on here. It's like, we don't. Just biologically, there's so much going on with the bacteria in our bodies that we have no idea, and you'll never want to know. And you don't really need to know. You just want them to be balanced and doing their jobs. It's a crazy amount. We're 99% bacteria DNA, by the way. 75% of our cells are bacteria. So just on that one little thing, we don't know how it works. Psychologically, most of the ego's in the subconscious. Most of it was being built in childhood when we didn't have the adult mind to understand what we're accepting, what we're setting now as a baseline for how we respond to men and how we respond to women, how we respond to fun, how do we respond to work, right? All that stuff, kind of going back to the energy discussion, is sitting down in the subconscious, telling us how we feel and how we think and what we should do. Now, when it comes to windows and doors, having my subconscious immediately recognize and know what to do is fantastic. But when it comes to people, it's a problem, right? So all the different projections that I have about you, Daniel, and I do, right? That's just what we've done when we've seen enough people that we're always going to have a projection onto a person. They have nothing to do with you. And that's actually empowering to me because now I don't play by them, or if they in any way sort of get in the way, I kind of like slide them to the side. And where I'm not projecting anymore, that actually makes it more open and easy to be together. That's one of the things that people often like, as some of you are letting go of issues in your life inside yourself. The level of relaxation you offer other people is wonderful. So other people are kind of like, I want to be around this person. It's like, this feels good because you can feel it, that they're not throwing the story on top of you. Like there's almost a visceral quality when people are doing that to us, right? Of like, they think I'm this way or they want me to be a certain way. And this leads into all sorts of people pleasing things or resistance and fights and things like that. So clearing this out of the way is really, really powerful. So we can meet this moment now together to be curious. But we have to respect that the subconscious is real. There's a lot of layers that we don't understand that we're going to have to want to understand to unlearn. Otherwise, they're just going to keep doing their game. And the most common thing that happens on this path is to redecorate the prison cell wall room. We're like, okay, we looked out there, we can look up through the bars. I'm going to make this prettier. Now I have a spiritual name and a spiritual guru and a spiritual practice, and I live in a spiritual community, right? And so what we're doing is we're trying to insulate ourselves and live based off of the same deeper subconscious things that we already believe we should be living by that we still don't really know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I hear in that pointing towards humility and that curiosity that we spoke about earlier.
It's very humbling to realize you have no idea who you are or what you're doing. But it's very empowering when you let go and you can be curious about life. Again, if I start treating your cat as a cat and as a flamingo, suddenly we're getting along so much better. And everybody's like, wow, why is this going so well for you? It looks like you're in the flow. And right, it's because I'm looking what's actually happening and responding.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Something that I really, I guess, hold on to and return to again and again is the power of love in in life, but really coming to anyone or anything with that spirit of love for me is I think of the core of love as being acceptance. When you accept someone or something wholly, totally, completely, warmly, um it's you know I feel like that is the essence of getting through anything or meeting anything. It's like, can you love it, whether it's painful or difficult or causing you all sorts of, can you be with it and can you love it?
Yeah, last week I wrote a blog post talking about how heart openings are intoxicating because we have these moments of coming in contact with deeper qualities of love. And I really create three levels of that. So the first is the most common one. It's localized love, and it really still has to do with you and the situation and the place. And so we often can have those profound moments, like, and if it's with a person, we'll call it the soulmate, the twin flame. We start making words that make it special, which is part of the problem, actually. But it's a deep place, and we want to get back to that. But then when the moment ends, it goes away. Non localized love has less and less to do with the circumstances around you. It'll show up in a circumstance like me on a San Francisco municipal bus staring at the floor. There's nothing really to love about that floor. Okay. It's a bus floor. But that was a moment where, like, wow. And I was just transfixed. It was kind of an HD moment, high definition, because that's another feeling that we sometimes have when like a veil drops. It's like everything kind of like comes into high definition. So there I am staring at the municipal bus floor in love with it. So that's non-localized. And the love didn't really end when I got off, right? Because it was still starting to be more about just being. But down below that isn't a feeling. Unconditional acceptance, unconditional love is just purely neutral. And that's a very different place. And that's the place that we need to be to really engage with things, because there are difficult things, to your point, difficult pains and problems in the world, that when we come from that unconditional love, we can engage with it again better, right? So the unconditional love, though, we can't really truly accept something if we don't see it.
Mm.
If we don't see it, then we're just unconditionally accepting our illusion of it, which is part of the problem. So that's how this whole inner work kind of builds together. So these are three layers that I can see us that we work through. And the encouragement, of course, is that continued dropping through to not just fall into love, but fall through it to this bottom level of unconditional acceptance.
Hmm. And that unconditional acceptance is, you described it as this neutrality.
Purely neutral.
Yeah. And is that, that's interesting. Yeah. You know, is there then, it's just a kind of openness to being, a seeing what is? Is that how you
Yeah,
describe it?
yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. And I guess there's, you know, maybe an aversion to that among people who, and I think this is maybe a common critique of Buddhism that people have. It's like, oh, well, it doesn't have, any real love. It's just kind of passive and, or it doesn't have that warmth. Um, and yeah, I wonder about that. Um, it feels to me like a seeing of how things really are, and they are really that way, and yet we also are human beings and people, as you said before, this is our vehicle of getting around the world. And human beings, I mean, it seems to me at least that they need that kind of warmth and that kind of, a non neutrality, at the same time as we understand that everything is, you know yeah, maybe a playing at both levels is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we do the work so we can realize for ourselves that all experiences come and go, that attachments to love will end up usually making the reverse. And that's what we usually find at that first sort of intense localized love that we'll often feel like is we're actually starting to create suffering because we're getting attached to one of the countless infinite number of ways we can experience ourselves. Unconditional love isn't cold or neutral. That's a passing experience as far as coldness goes, and distance or passivity. Those are passing experiences. It's just unconditional. From here, without attachment, we can choose how to be. And to your point, I generally choose to be warm and inviting more so than others. But I can also choose to be hard and rigid and strong in certain ways too. It's the flexibility of meeting the moment of what does the person or situation actually need, not what do I want it to be? How do I want to feel? When we're stuck in our ego and we're stuck in our suffering, how I want to feel dominates. And we'll deflect it off. People pleasers do this all the time. Where people pleasing is a form of manipulation. We're trying to manipulate another to be happy so that we feel better about ourselves, or we feel safer, or we feel happier. So that's one of the ways we'll deflect out. It's like, well, no, I'm always trying to do stuff for other people. It's like, no, you're still doing it for yourself. We're going to find a whole lot of selfishness inside, and we're going to find a whole lot of discontent and suffering. And that's why there's such drive towards things like heart opening. It's like, well, I want to keep that. If you don't have the suffering, you don't care. And so love can come and go, and you enjoy when love shows up in your living room, and you're okay when love leaves and you don't suffer the parting. And other experiences will come and go too, and that's okay.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end. And thank you, Jim. We're going to take a few minutes pause, and then we'll come back for an open discussion. So we'll take a bio break now, and I'll see you all in about 3 or 4 minutes. Yeah. So welcome back. We've got David back, and I think a few other folks are still maybe taking a break. Yeah, this is kind of an going to be an open dialogue, open conversation. You talk, ask Jim questions, ask me, ask one another. Just yeah. So I'll just open the floor, and we'll see where things go.
So thanks, Daniel. I am curious a bit about a comment that was made. I don't recall it completely, so I'm not like shaming anyone for saying anything wrong, but something along the lines of misinterpreting biological issues or medical issues for a spiritual awakening. And I'm curious about that because in the law, like divine order, everything happens as it should. And so I'm curious if sometimes biological quote unquote malfunctionings are in fact the thing that propels you or provokes a spiritual awakening. And if any of you can speak to that.
Sure, I can speak to that. I think we always want to know what's actually going on. And so being curious about what's going on in my body, to me, makes the most sense. I'm reading a book called The History of the Human Body, precisely to better understand how do we work? What are the conditions that we were developed, involved in to be? And how can we potentially replicate them or do something similar in today's modern society? We have very clearly created a lot of kinds of sicknesses. Now, if we can use that as a reason to go inwards, that's great, but that's not usually what people are doing. But there's a lot of stuff that's mismatches. These are some of the terms that some of the anthropologists and paleontologists are using, a mismatch between what our current environment is and what we're designed to do. And that's creating sickness. There's a lot of things that are going wrong for the human body that don't have to go that way. So I always want people to be able to take care of themselves and to be in the best wellness, because to me, that's when we surrender, it's like, isn't that a choice we would make for ourselves? Wouldn't we want to be healthy, or do we want to actually choose to be sick? Letting go of ego illusions around lots of different things is a way that we can see what's actually going on.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't know if this is related to what you're asking, Socorro, or if it's something different. I've been thinking a lot recently, or really not just recently, but for a while now, about what is the difference between um, psychosis and an awakening. It seems that a lot of the people that I've spoken to that have had awakening experiences, many of them went and were actually put into psych wards, sometimes usually against their will, or went through intense depressions or really difficult periods of psychological turbulence. Um, and and I'm reading different accounts and different interpretations, but I'm curious, Jim, if you have any thoughts on this, or if anybody else does.
Yeah, this is a real muddled mess right now, because of, again, different definitions, about what is psychosis and what is not in that community in and of itself. Because I don't I don't know how much people appreciate the difference between a deep space of peaceful detachment and dissociation, right? And hallucination. And a lot of things, to the modern society, talking about reality sounds like hallucination to them. I don't have a great example coming off the top of my head. But then other people who legitimately are hallucinating about other things. And again, a lot of the spiritual community will actually abet that and enable that sort of thinking. It's usually often driven by specialness. That's one of the things that I start to look for when I'm listening to somebody. Is this somebody who's now imagining a new special story for themselves? Because that tends to speak towards deeper levels of mental health, deeper self-worth issues, and pains and traumas that fundamentally feel terrible. So the special story is always alluring to that deeper pain that wants to go away. That's a very different sort of thing. So I have to inquire, right? So I think that's kind of going to be the simplest way I can answer this, Daniel. It's like I stay curious with people who come to me. And so I start asking lots of questions like, well, what's going on? And what are you feeling? What were you experiencing? So I can figure out, what are we calling a psychosis? Are we talking a deep, peaceful, detached thing where you suddenly realize you're not this thing? Which can freak people out if you don't know that's a possibility. And suddenly you feel like, I'm not this body, and then come back like, holy shit, was I possessed? Was I, right? If you're in a different religious paradigm, that might be what you interpret it as. So misinterpretations of the ego come up a lot in terms of like, how do we look at what our experience is and how do we explain it back to ourselves? And that's just sort of a natural part of like developing your words. I think a recent blog or newsletter I sent out was around like developing your verbiage. And that's why I talk about journaling so much, being able to figure out, okay, what does this mean? Rather than trying to use the structures we have to label the thing that we have now. So misunderstandings, not having language to explain what's going on with us or explain with it well, the different structures around us and culture around us in terms of how they're going to interpret something we say. can create all sorts of different labels of something as being psychosis or not, or enabling or not, that make it kind of a muddle. So yeah, you have to really want to understand the person. You have to care about them to do that deep dive with them to figure out what is going on. Because as always, we want them to be best supported, and we don't want to like enable an actual psychosis when maybe some sort of prescription medicine makes sense. And we certainly don't want to put somebody in a psych ward. And I have had those emails where somebody wasn't in a bad place, but their culture around them says, well, that's crazy, we're going to stick you in here.
Yeah.
There's a woman named Emma Bragdon. Are any of you familiar with her? She runs Integrative Mental Health University, PhD, and she enlightened me to, there are spiritist hospitals in Brazil. So she teaches about those so that we can have a new concept of what psychosis is and how it can be different. So basically, if someone is experiencing symptoms of psychosis and they are told that they are on the verge of a spiritual awakening, they're kind of seen as the gifted member of the community. And they go away to inpatient treatment, but it's with peer support, it's with psychiatrists, psychologists who are all intuitive, and they're basically nurturing this person's gift. So when you're told you're not going crazy, you come out well on the other side. They're showing like less need for psychotropic meds, less recidivism. Kind of a cool concept, and something I think America needs to adopt, that when you see someone going through stress and struggle, it may actually be like a burgeoning awakening. And by reducing the shame, an individual can have a more positive outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard similar things among different communities around the world where somebody that is having a what to us would look like a psychological breakdown is recognized by a member of their community as having a shamanic gift, and they're taken, they're nurtured, and they're guided, and they become an important member of the community, playing that role. So it's I think there's I have still so many questions about, like what are the markers of what a person might need. And I think, Jim, you're pointing to, is it a mark of specialness, or is it a mark of, is somebody recognizing and realizing the real oneness and unity of everyone's experience? That it's not just one person or a small group of people, but we're all in this together. That to me is something that I'm interested in looking for.
Can I touch on one thing that I heard Jim mention it, and you as well, Daniel, in different contexts, but it's a weird time to be exploring this spiritual awakening concept, the path. There's a lot of, in my very modest experience, there's a lot of ways to get off on bad exit ramps right now. There is, with social media and the internet, there's extensive misinformation out there. Some of it, I think, well-intended, some of it derived by profit motive, and it's scary. And as you talk about folks who are in what I will call sensitive situations or vulnerable situations, either because it's an awakening or they're dealing with a psychological issue, gosh, there's a lot of pitfalls out there. And that's a whole new world. You go back in how spirituality has developed in cultures over thousands of years, it wasn't that way. You might not have run into 20 other people all talking about their energies moving in their body in your whole life. And now you can go on the internet and see 5 minutes, 20 people to tell you exactly how to do it and what it means. So I think Jim, at least for me, is a bit of an oasis in that his approach, it may not make you feel unicorns and rainbows very much, and I think he's very honest about that's not what the path is, at least at its base. But it's very responsible. I think there's a lot of integrity to it because at the end of the day, as best I understand it, and it's a burgeoning understanding, is that all of this is nobody's going to give it to you. People can give you some pointers, they can give you some guidance, but it's really a matter of just looking inward over and over. And where I think Jim and others like him are helpful to me is introspection is one thing, and I've always felt like I was kind of introspective. I was always looking at what's going on. Why am I doing that? Why do I feel that way? But if not careful, you can get spun up into nothing but a bunch of ego talk and introspection. And where I think Jim's been helpful to me, tried to be helpful, is in identifying, okay, what is the ego? What's it doing in that process? And how do you pull that away to really see what that reality is? So appreciation to Jim. I appreciate your interview with him. And it's nice to hear him in a dialogue with someone else. But I think Jim would be the first one to say this is usually not about him. It's about kind of helping us to look at what we got to do on our own.
Yeah, I think one of the points I would build off there too is like, why do we do inner work? A lot of spiritual things, it's like, well, we're already here now. It's like, how do you be more here now? Well, you don't. What we learn as we look inside ourselves is that we're patterns. We're patterns that just endlessly repeat. And so what I'm helping people do is to start to interrupt those patterns. And that's uncomfortable to say the least, of how we think and how we feel, because we're so used to believing, well, this is the correct way from how I think and how I feel, rather than this has been learned. It's either been learned by biology or by our upbringing. And so we watch these patterns go over and over again. And it's great when awakening or an opening kind of pokes a hole through, right? Says, hey, this pattern is happening. And this is what happens if it stops. And again, if we like the stopping, then, it's blissful and happy and joyful. If we don't like the stopping, then we're disturbed and we're like, how do I get the cycle to go again? So we start to watch this. And when we start talking about these loops, it isn't just in our head, right? The most powerful attachments, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's physical. That if we're scared that our sports team isn't going to win today, right, that is a whole bodied experience. And that can be kind of a weird thing. So I was originally born back in Massachusetts. And so you grow up and you bleed green and black and gold and red and white and silver, red and blue. It's just a sports town, right? So you can build a huge ego identity around that. And I remember I got to a certain point where I was realizing that watching a sports game, and there's this amazing, amazing crew of New Englanders living in California, of all places at the time where I was just being scared for 3 hours about an outcome. That's what being it, right? But that was the loop. And for so long, that was so deeply mired in me. I didn't even see it. If you told like that to me, like, I don't know, 10 years before, it's like, you're just scaring yourself for 3 hours about these strangers that you don't know. That's what you're doing, right? So this is a level of reality. So now I have a choice, right? Do I continue this cycle? Do I continue to go on Sundays and sometimes Mondays and occasionally Thursdays, because we got to put football on all sorts of days, unless it's in the winter, and sometimes it might be a Saturday, to go watch this stuff and scare myself for 3 hours? And I said no, right? So now the identity, right, that New England sports fan identity is being disrupted, right? So now I get to watch that in the different ways that I felt connected to community. It's like, it starts to become kind of an interesting thing that before was just in the background. This is not super subconscious thing. But if I don't understand what's going on, I can't interrupt it. So I continue to do it. And this is the nature of inner work with a lot of things, that we're going to continue to think and act and feel in certain ways over and over again, not knowing why we do it. And that is a part of suffering, is the inability to change. And all of that is still going on based off of my illusion around something mattering, like these strangers hitting each other and that somehow making me happy or sad.
Yeah, I think that bringing stuff out of the unconscious and making it conscious is what I think a lot of psychological work is about, which is just another type of inner work. And yeah, it's
if I can just to make a key point, this is a question. It's like there is a lot of overlap, but most of what psychology is doing that I've seen is trying to help a person be functional in society, not to be free. That is important. However, being free takes us into other issues that psychology never cares about. like the illusion of being successful, the illusion of being attractive, the illusion of needing to produce things, the illusion of consuming things, and the importance. And I mean, not food, but like some of these other things we're being told that we need to consume. Usually psychology is more like, can you put your shoes on and not feel terrible today and go to work? And, how do you work through depressions, anxiety? So it serves a very important purpose, but the healing path is very direct and like there is an outcome. And once you get there, you're fine. So I often describe it as like having two broken legs when you can't walk. There's a very clear thing of setting the legs, accepting the problem, rehab, going out. And there's very clear steps. With spiritual freedom, you don't have to do this. You don't have to challenge your illusions around success and failure. You don't. So psychology would say, well, it's just fine. Yeah, you can succeed in this or fail in this. We want you to succeed, and here are your 5 steps to better happiness, self-improvement gets in that world. Spiritual freedom says, this attachment to this illusion of success makes me suffer. I'm going to let that go too. So it's a little bit different once we get out there. But yes, there is overlap, and surrender is key in all of it.
That's actually very, very helpful. Yeah, thinking of it as psychology's aim is to help us to function, help us to heal so that we can function in the world. And spiritual work is to help us be free, to be free even of the societal games, of our own, identities, of all those different layers.
Because then you can choose when you play by the success game. Right? It's okay, so this matters to be successful this way. Now I know that I'm doing it. I don't have to do it. So that's the kind of this return. So kind of this you go to the source to like understand the truth, right? This is a big metaphor in our best stories. Is this returning to source? Then you come back with understanding. Like, okay, there are times when I need to think about success. Oh, okay, this is how I'm going to handle that. But when you're not attached to it, you're not going to kill yourself if you're failed by whatever the rubric is of failure. It's no longer part of like who you are, where success and failure are deeply entrenched in so many people's identities and psyches. Like this is who they are, and they continue to evaluate themselves against the world based off of that, rising when they feel like they meet it, falling when they feel like they don't.
Yeah. Any other questions or just reflections that people may have coming from this conversation?
Just for fun, I'm interested in either of you guys' thoughts about spiritual awakening ever being in the DSM. Do you think this is something that will be like criteria and bona fide?
Personally, I kind of hope so.
Me too. Me too. Looking for support.
I wonder if isn't it already? I don't know why I think that it might be, but don't quote me on that. So go. I feel like I've heard like there's something around that.
I feel like the transpersonal psychology school, that's kind of their one of their points is that a lot of awakenings are misdiagnosed as psychoses, which we've touched upon today. But yeah, I think that, and so I just got admitted to grad school for counseling, and I have waffled on applying for many years because my mother's a psychologist. I deeply appreciate the field, and yet at the same time, I also look at it as just mired in a lot of old ways of thinking about the mind and consciousness and what's going on. And I think things are changing because, things are always changing. But I hope that if there's anything that I could nudge the world of psychiatry towards is just recognizing the value of spiritual work and inquiry and recognizing it as this is not an area of madness or something completely apart from psychology. This is actually I think can be used and looked at for true health, beyond just adapting to, I think, as Jim was pointing to, our society as it is. But no, let's really go beyond. Let's go to the end of this and really be free. Yeah.
I'm interested in like improving that this is a thing, right? I know I probably won't be able to do it in my lifetime, but I'm interested in like building the data to support it. And one thing I'm interested in is really like astrology's impact. Like for those of us who have undergone a spiritual awakening in the past however many years, right? Do we have something similar happening in our charts? Are we designed to go through this at this time? Because I think if we can find like timing supporting the impact it has on people, then we're like on to something. So I'm just, because I work in the field of social science and psychology, I want to bridge it because it needs to be bridged. So I'm out here searching for the evidence. And astrology is one way I'm looking. Do either of you have any opinions about astrology's impact or the cosmos impact on our well-being?
Jim?
I think we still underestimate just what's going on in our society and how that's impacting our bodies. And we're often looking out further towards other ideas rather than looking within more specifically at what's happening in our bodies. And we just get dropped into the social soup that we get dropped in, right? So there's so many things that are so normal, like breathing polluted air, that we don't understand how that's impacting us. And we don't understand what all the stuff that's in our water is impacting us. And that includes both the stuff they put in it and the stuff that they can't get out of it. For example, dog gut bacteria doesn't come out. Neither does antibiotics, microplastics, or arsenic from cigarettes. And we have all this stuff happening inside ourselves that's creating all sorts of crazy stresses. This is where I'm going. And so if you put something under enough stress, we do start looking for solutions. And every now and then that stress is going to pop somebody out into realizing something real. Like, this is crazy how we're living. This is no way that any human being should be. So that's where I'm always going to take it before I go looking further towards a larger sort of macro answer around astrology. I'm going to go back to the body. And again, what we tend to find is all these imbalances that we don't know how to interpret. And the ego is constantly trying to interpret. And in our head culture, right, that thinks it can think its way out of anything, it's grabbing onto all kinds of ideas that aren't actually the thing that needs to be addressed. And again, I want to come with love and kindness and compassion to find what's really going on for the person so they can be best supported and taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a similar view to Jim. That, I really I don't know what's going on, with the universe in all of its many mysterious workings. I don't know. I tend to look for answers in, what's going on around you, what's going on with your psychology, with your family, with your social situation, with your body, before you know looking to things like astrology. And I find that at least for me, pretty much most, if not all, of what I'm searching for in either my own life or in the people that I'm working with, it leads to social, psychological, emotional, body based issues or breakthroughs. The gold and shadow that we come across usually, I find, have in some ways much more mundane roots, and that's ultimately I don't know if their astrology has some bearing on our lives, and I may never know. But I look at what's in front of me, and I go with that. So we're coming to the end of our time. I just want to thank Jim again for taking this time. It's been a pleasure being in dialogue and in conversation with you, as well as with all of you in the audience, David, Eric, Socorro. And as I said, I'll post this on my YouTube channel, and yeah, I'm grateful and excited for meeting all of you. And Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.